It is a good day to watch the show if you are stuck in your house on a snow day. The 1067 The Fan YouTube channel allows you to watch us in high definition. And of course, you can listen to us wherever you are on the Odyssey app, thanks to our friends listening in Richmond, AM 910, FM 1051, and all over the DMV on our flagship 1067. But let's talk to Alec Lewis, who covers the Vikings for The Athletic in Minnesota, about the newest member of the Commanders staff. Alec, it's Grant and Danny in the nation's capital. How are you, sir?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Was pretty excited to see Daronte get this opportunity. I think everyone here who has observed him, talked to people about him, gotten to know him, believed that this was coming down the pipe. So cool to see it happen. I'm excited to talk about it.
So let's get into Daronte Jones. Why do you feel like he was a DC in waiting, and what do you make of the hire for Washington?
Yeah, well, I'll just start. I mean, last year, Daronte interviewed for multiple defensive coordinator opportunities. One of them was with the New Orleans Saints. I remember at the time, or after the fact, a couple weeks after the fact, at the Combine, talking to an exec in New Orleans who was in on the interview, and eventually they hired Brandon Staley, but the exec was like, Daronte did a really good job, and he will be in prime position for one of these spots in the near future. So it wasn't shocking to me to see his name as just common around the NFL within a lot of these defensive coordinator conversations. I mean, Daronte, kind of to the initial question, he's a combination of a lot of things that I think these teams and these coaches are looking for in the defensive side of the ball. His schematic background is pretty deep when you're talking about spending time with Mike Zimmer, Lou Anarumo, and Brian Flores, obviously with what they've done the last couple of years. And then he's just a good dude. The players really respected him. You've seen that a little bit with the couple tweets and Instagram posts from some of the guys here. So just the way I describe it is probably within a lot of these roles, these coaches are looking for guys with very few yellow and red flags, and Daronte doesn't have any. So it was just a matter of time.
Why do you think it took as long as it did for a guy that's been around? He's in his mid-40s, pretty much my age, but has been coaching for a while. Seems like everybody's kind of bullish and excited about his prospects, but it did take a while for him to kind of ascend to a bigger chair.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it probably it's a broader conversation in terms of who gets hired and who doesn't in this league and in college football. I mean, I think there's a lot of it that's media-driven. I think there's a lot of it that's agent-driven. I think there's a lot of it that's, for lack of a better term, it's like who are the coaches friends with driven. I think that's a lot of what drives some of these hires. And Daronte, I mean, he specifically with the NFL in the last half decade, I mean, he hasn't bounced around a ton. He's been here. He worked for Mike Zimmer, like I mentioned. He worked for Ed Donatel in 2022 for a defense that didn't have much talent. Then Ed Donatel got fired. They brought in Brian Flores, and in the last couple of years, given what this defense has done, producing turnovers, giving quarterbacks serious problems throughout the entire season for multiple years, his name has been kind of within the buzz, and I think it was just going to be incumbent upon a head coach and a regime taking a chance on a guy who hadn't done it at the NFL level.
We're talking to Alec Lewis, who covers the Vikings in Minnesota for The Athletic, about the newest member of the Commanders staff, their defensive coordinator, Daronte Jones, hired yesterday. So one of the selling points is obviously that he brings the Flores scheme. I don't know to what extent he'll run what Flores does, but he was his right-hand man. Can you go deeper into just his role and how close he and Flores were and how closely they worked together? I mean, is it fair to say that he was his top lieutenant, so to speak?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Daronte was the defensive pass game coordinator in charge of, really the entire secondary, safeties, cornerbacks, and Brian Flores' defense. Really, the defensive backs are the hub of communication for the defense, making checks pre-snap, and kind of just orchestrating things from the back end. So you would see him, I can recall so many training camp and OTAs days of him being the vocal guy out with most of the secondary. And so I mean, there's just no Brian Flores. I'll say this too. Brian Flores, I mean, he expects a lot. He has a very high standard. He is very direct. He, working for him, you have to meet a certain bar, and he and Daronte really hit it off from the outset when Brian Flores got here in 2023. And the other thing I would say that probably Commanders fans, I don't know, would enjoy hearing is Brian Flores and what he's done the last few years here is beyond different from what he did in Miami. In Miami, it was a similarly aggressive scheme, but it was a man coverage, really heavy scheme. And here, it's been a zone, different types of coverage disguise, really dominated scheme. And so I think the cool thing with Daronte is he has the principles of what it would look like in a man-heavy scheme from his time with Zimmer to the different ways you can incorporate zone to the past few years with Brian Flores. So there's just a breadth of knowledge and experience that he brings and knowing what it looks like to kind of adapt and evolve to what you have on a season-by-season basis, but a week-to-week basis, too.
Alec Lewis with us here on Grant and Danny gave us some great insight into Daronte Jones, new defensive coordinator here in Washington. So you kind of touched on this, but I'd love for you to go in depth. Obviously, we haven't seen his scheme yet, talking about Daronte Jones, because he hasn't been a defensive coordinator yet, but just from what your conversations with him, just kind of observing, how do you think it'll be different maybe from Flores, and how much of it will be kind of a reprint?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I'm a scheme nerd, and I love following this stuff, so I'm going to be very curious to see how much they they incorporate what they've done with Brian Flores, and a lot of that is off coverage. It is zone drops where defenders really have eyes on the quarterback. Like, one of the interesting aspects of what Brian Flores has done here is the defense it's not like they don't have rules, but they are very loose and fast with their rules so that the players can play really fast, and so they're not thinking a ton. And so I would imagine, I mean, it's going to be dependent on the personnel of, does Daronte think that the secondary in Washington and guys they bring in, et cetera, does he think they have the bandwidth and the ability to incorporate a lot of those rules and still play fast on the fly? Or does he take the approach here of, you know what, we're going to make things simpler and allow guys to play fast and lean really heavily into what they do on the front? I mean, I think that's going to be an important aspect for you guys, obviously, to follow. Something I'll be curious about is, who does he bring in on the defensive line and on kind of the front seven to help him coach that defense? Because what Brian Flores has done here and what Daronte oversaw and played witness to really was just a beautiful combination of marrying up what they do on the front and what they do on the back end. And he will have an understanding of how they got to the place that they've gotten to the last few years. So going to be interesting to see what what style and where he leans into in both of those aspects.
Alec, you're talking to someone who loves the Flores scheme and loves Flores, but I'm wondering, when it's come up short or when they've struggled, is there like a certain type of offense that has been an issue? I think about like McDonald being an answer key for Shanahan, it seems like, or sometimes like the Dan Quinn defense has not worked against the Shanahan offense with LaFleur and McDaniel and some of those guys. I know this year the Ravens scored almost 30, or the Chargers scored almost 40. Just over the few years, we know what it looks like when it's really good. We saw them shove Washington into a locker 31-0. But is there something that gives it fits, or when it hasn't gone as good, what has that been about?
Yeah, stopping the run. When they have had trouble stopping the run, then offenses are in shorter downs and distances, especially on third down, and it's easier on quarterbacks. I mean, that's really been the secret sauce of this scheme. It's been the ability to make quarterbacks, offensive lines, and opposing coaches have to think very quickly and adapt on the fly. And so a lot of the young quarterbacks they face and coordinators who maybe aren't as experienced have had trouble managing the game throughout a lot of the mental pressure that the Vikings apply. And so I'd say teams that have run the ball effectively on early downs, and then quarterbacks and coordinators and offenses that are really sharp, that are typically veterans who can adapt on the fly in game. I mean, those are the ones that have given Brian Flores problems. And I will say the other thing that I'm going to be curious to watch, I mean, one of the underrated aspects of what Brian Flores has done here is the in-game adaptability. And that's why, I mean, for years here, the matchups between him and Ben Johnson were phenomenal because both of those guys were so good and are so good at being able to make tweaks in game. So can Daronte Jones in Washington, with that new personnel in the first season being there, can he get to a place at which they can be as adaptable? That'll be another thing just for me that I will have my eyes on from afar.
Alec, we're reading up. This all happened in a hurry. It went from someone that wasn't on our radar to they interviewed, fell in love, and hired all basically within like an hour and a half, numbers approximate. As a teacher, that seems to be a great rep of his, as a guy that's a great teacher as a defensive backs coach. Obviously, maybe a little bit less time hands-on teaching in that role, but there's still probably some in terms of player development. Give me kind of a thought there, instead of just saying, hey, meet the expectation. How is he kind of boots on the ground, hands-on, improving players?
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of examples, and I think I was talking to my colleague at The Athletic, Nikki, about this yesterday when the hiring became official. I said to her, the cool thing for Daronte is he has gotten to work with so many different types of players, especially in the safety room and on the back end. When you think of a Harrison Smith who has been in the NFL for seemingly 60 seasons and the type of experience that guy has. When you think about the development of Cam Bynum, who went from a cornerback in college, drafted the Vikings, developed by Daronte Jones, and then signed a big money deal in free agency to play safety for the Indianapolis Colts. When you think about Josh Metellus, who was a sixth-round pick from Michigan, kind of a special teams guy, Brian Flores gets here, and now he's been a guy who's making multi-millions of dollars as a key cog on the defense. I mean, I remember having a conversation with Daronte during training camp about Theo Jackson, one of the safeties here, and I remember Daronte saying to me, like, I've been pretty hard on Theo, and so there is a level of, the standard that I talked about earlier, a level of accountability, and then I also think there is an understanding of, how hard to be on guys and when to ease up. Daronte is a very aware guy. I think he has a really good read on people, and I think that's also part of the reason why the people in this building, players and coaches, have been as happy for Daronte as they've been because of the type of guy he is as much as anything else.
We're talking about the Commanders coaching staff and the DC hire Daronte Jones with Alec Lewis, who covered him in Minnesota on the Vikings beat with The Athletic. It'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about David Blough as well. I know he, was not about to coordinate offense under Kevin O'Connell, but he did play there at one point as a backup quarterback and kind of finished his playing career in Arizona thereafter. But what do you make of Blough, who you got to know a little bit, now at 30 being named the OC here, another first-time play-calling coordinator for Dan Quinn?
Yeah, I think it's potentially in my opinion, one of the sneakiest hires of the entire cycle in the NFL. I obviously covered David here, have talked to him a lot over the years, thought he was unbelievably sharp. You go back to 2022, the Vikings traded for TJ Hawkinson in the middle of that season, and David Blough was a practice squad quarterback here, and David had crossover with TJ from their time in Detroit. And so in 4 days, David essentially met with TJ, translated the entire Lions system into the Viking system for him. And you guys might remember the first game TJ played was in Washington. I believe he had 8 catches that day and attributed a lot of his ability to be as seamless within the offense to the help of David Blough. So, I was under the impression that if he went to Detroit and if that interview went down the road, then that would have been a real possibility. So for the Commanders to make that happen as quick as they did, I think was pretty telling. And it's another one where, just as a fan of the league, as someone who really follows this, the coaching stuff, because I think position coaches especially are some of the most underrated aspects of these teams and organizations that thrive and those that don't. Watching how David builds that thing with Jaden, I'll be fascinated from afar.
Yeah, what do you think will win in kind of the push and pull inside David Blough's mind? I guess what I mean is he's got some pretty good mentors as masters in terms of different systems and things that he's been a part of or been around. What do you think will dominate his philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, you hear every coach say, they're going to build it around their players, and I'd say you hear that all the time. And how often is that actually the case? I don't think probably as often as people might think. But I would say with David, his awareness level of what Jaden likes, what he doesn't like, I would imagine will dominate his philosophy. But then his experience here, his experience in Detroit, playing under center, under center play action. I think that would probably be my expectation. And I think Jaden is more than capable of playing that way, but being able to design an offense that doesn't make the quarterback have to shoulder the entire burden on every single snap, I think is kind of what the meta of what teams are looking for right now seems to be. I think it's harder to find than it is to say, but I do think David is capable. So that's what I'd say. Probably building the concepts to what Jaden Daniels likes to throw, but doing that in a way that removes all of the responsibility from being on his plate on every single snap.
Alec, before we let you go, let's localize the convo to your beat in the Vikings. J.J. McCarthy, 10 games in now, sub 60% of his passes complete. Hard to do in the NFL at this point. 11 touchdowns, 12 picks. How convinced are the Vikings that he's the guy, or might they be in the market for a quarterback? Just feels like they wasted a pretty good roster this year by not having a better answer.
Yeah, they're definitely in the market for a quarterback. I mean, Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi have both said that they are seeking competition at that position for J.J. McCarthy. The question is going to be what level of insurance are they going to be looking for? I mean, last year, it's crazy how it played out. The team was not willing to go more than a year with Sam Darnold for reasons that did make sense. They obviously wanted to keep Daniel Jones in the building. Daniel Jones thought the opportunity in Indianapolis was a better opportunity, and that left them, the Vikings I'm talking about, in a pretty tough situation. They signed Carson Wentz right before the season, and then the combination of his injuries and J.J. McCarthy's inconsistency and lack of availability really put a Vikings team that was one of the most cash-spent teams in the NFL in a spot where they didn't make the playoffs. So you've got a GM and a head coach entering their fifth seasons without a playoff win. You've got a quarterback that hasn't been able to stay healthy consistently. And you've got an aging roster that does, fortunately for the Vikings, have a defensive coordinator that is an elite level defensive coordinator. So it's going to be fascinating to see what type of quarterback they try to acquire, how they go about that, and what that means for J.J. McCarthy's future once that decision is made.
Alec, awesome with us, buddy. Appreciate the time and insight, man. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of the week.
You as well. Alec Lewis covers the Vikings for The Athletic in Minnesota. They got a busy offseason ahead. Really good information, though, on Daronte Jones there.